Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders? Today we're going to focus upon this very interesting organization and see what they're doing to help women around the world deal with some really challenging situations. My guest today is an expert on this group. My guest today is Mavic Cabrera-Balleza, a Philippine national who is the international coordinator of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. Mavic, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me. And hello to all the viewers of the Global Connections.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's start off with just a basic overview of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. What exactly is it? When was it formed? Why was it formed?
The Global Network of Women Peacebuilders is an international coalition of women's organizations and civil society groups from over 30 countries, mostly conflict-affected countries. And our work is focused on ensuring women's participation in decision-making and peace processes, especially peace negotiations at the official level. I'm emphasizing here peace negotiations at the official level because we know women are present everywhere, especially at the community level. They are by nature peace builders and decision makers. But when it becomes official and high level, they disappear because the framework of official peace negotiations marginalize women. They are not seen as the authorities on this issue. And peace building or peace and security is often equated with defense and military. And in that context, many decision makers do not see women as the authority. And we were formed in 2010. And initially, we were reflecting on the impact of Resolution 1325, the Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which was adopted in 2001. And then it was going on in the 10th anniversary, and we were saying, what exactly have we achieved in using this instrument as a tool for peace building? And that's how we started to get together to create better impact, greater impact, because when we come together, we believe our voices are louder and stronger. And
to become more proactive and carry out programs. Very good.
Exactly.
Before I forget, let's talk about your website. If our viewers would like more information, they can go to www.gnwp.org and learn much more about this very interesting organization.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned you were over 30 countries, I believe. I noticed on your website you had 5 objectives. Why don't we focus on those 5 objectives and go through them, and maybe you could bring in a project or two that pertains to each of those objectives. But the first one was to enhance women's capacities as far as interacting with legal mechanisms, the legal machinery of the various governments where they live. Why is that important, and how can they do that?
First, let's look at what's on the landscape in terms of policies and legal mechanisms. There's a lot at the global and national level. At the global level, we have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We have the Beijing Platform for Action. And of course, we have Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, plus its 7 supporting resolutions. And those are just the few instruments at the global level. At the national level, our research show that countries have, on the average, at least 4 national policies on women's rights, on gender equality. So there is no shortage of policies. What's the shortage is in the implementation. So we're enhancing women's capacity to make use of those legal mechanisms to assert their rights and for their rights to be promoted, respected, and fulfilled, meaning honored by the government. Because we know that there's a big gap between all the talk that's happening here in New York, in the UN, and the actual walk on the ground. So we work with women's organizations, especially local grassroots women's organizations in communities directly affected by conflict, to make use of those policies. And often it starts with awareness raising. Many of them do not know that these laws even exist. So how can they use them if they're not even aware of it?
Exactly, that's very true. Now, do you do this through workshops, or do you have materials? You do it electronically? You have people on the ground who are working with you said network with some of these women's organizations. How do you do that? How do you get that information out?
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay.
So
our next question.
Yeah, we work with women's organizations and other civil society groups, meaning mixed organizations that have gender equality program or women's rights program. And our very first step is awareness raising. And this is where organizations like Global Connections come in. Mm-hmm. We use media a lot in raising awareness. We can, of course, we organize workshops all the time, but we know while workshops are very important, they are very interactive, and we can really have in-depth conversation. But in a workshop, you can probably bring together 50, at the most 100. That's already very big for a workshop, 100 people. But using the media, you can reach thousands, if not millions, in one, effective media message. Mm-hmm. So it's workshops in combination with media and all forms of media. The established media, meaning radio, print, and TV, and new media, meaning social media, Facebook, Twitter, and all of those. And we also put an emphasis in using radio in local communities, especially community radio in local languages, because there's a huge literacy barrier in the communities that we work in. For example, in DRC and South Sudan, in conflict-affected communities, the literacy level for women and girls is only at 20%. So we cannot rely on print, and we cannot rely on the internet and TV, because you don't even have electricity in most of these communities. So in those cases, we use radio a lot, because it's the most accessible and affordable medium for our target audience, and it also transcends literacy barrier. And then we also publish posters and of course policy briefs for the policymakers. So we have the range of audiences is very broad, and so the medium also has to vary.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how radio still is one of the major media arrangements
Absolutely.
To get the message out to people.
Yeah.
There are literally billions of people who still listen to radio.
Exactly.
It's true, even though we're in the age of computer and moving into the 21st century very rapidly. You mentioned Security Council Resolution 1325, which was adopted in 2000. I think that could tie together a lot of what we're talking about today. What exactly was the purpose of Security Council Resolution 1325?
The main pillars of Resolution 1325 are women's participation in decision making, particularly on matters of peace and security, but also in governance broadly. The other pillar is the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence in conflict and post-conflict situations. But on the prevention side of sexual and gender-based violence, we also emphasize that we're also preventing war. In fact, that's the bigger objective. We're preventing war, because for as long as there's war or violent conflicts, women and girls are always vulnerable to sexual and other forms of violence, especially if they're not seen as decision makers, if they are only seen as second-class citizens in their own communities and societies. And then the third pillar of Resolution 1325 is protection. Again, protection from sexual and gender-based violence, but we want to emphasize it's also about protection of women and girls' rights, because we believe that when the rights of women and girls are protected and respected, they can protect themselves. Like, they're not dependent on anyone to be protected.
Security Council Resolution 1325 has been very instrumental, not only externally, but also within the United Nations system too, to promote
Absolutely.
the focus on women and the contributions they can make within the system. I know just thinking back to, there was a peacekeeping mission in Liberia, the United Nations peacekeepers, and there was one whole contingent made up of women, mostly
Right.
from India.
From India,
From
yeah.
India. And of course that leads, traces right back to Security Council Resolution 1325.
Absolutely.
And women peacekeepers can be so helpful and so invaluable in a very dangerous setting, especially in interacting with women, can they not?
I can't agree with you more. Taking this particular example of Liberia, wherein India sent an all-women peacekeeping troops, what did it bring about? Many Liberian women began to express interest and actually applied to join their police forces, their national police forces. So the all-women peacekeeping troops served as a role model for Liberian women that being part of the security sector, meaning police and even military, is not for men alone. Women want to be engaged in this sector too. The other positive impact of that is that there was an increase in reporting of sexual and gender-based violence because they were more comfortable. The women who have been victims of such violence were more comfortable reporting to women police officers because they had, they had a connection. They had an automatic connection, and they felt that the women police officers are more sensitive to their special needs and concerns as women. And it also encouraged other countries. After India, Bangladesh followed by sending an all-women peacekeeping troop to Haiti. And we're hoping that other member states will do the same.
It was certainly a benchmark arrangement and is one that was very, very helpful and very effective, as I understand it. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is financially independent, and it's also independently produced. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We would encourage our viewers to go to the website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view any previous programs that have been aired. Also, if you're involved with any type of operation, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps some educational institution, or you just have a website and you'd like to share this information with your colleagues, please feel free to go to the website and go to the broadcasters page, download the programs, and Global Connections Television is provided free of charge at no cost as a public service. Today we're taking a look at an organization that's working to help really to promote women and also to help them to deal with many of the challenges that they confront in various areas of the world. And my guest today is an expert on this. My guest today is Ms. Mavic Cabrera-Balleza, who is the International Coordinator of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. Mavic, we were talking about Security Council Resolution 1325. There's another one that came out, I think, about 2007, 2008, Security Council Resolution 1820. What exactly was that, and why is that important in a war zone or any place else, to be quite honest?
Resolution 1820 strengthened the impact of Resolution 1325. As I explained earlier, Resolution 1325 is quite broad. It addresses women's participation in decision-making and in peace processes, the protection of women from sexual and gender-based violence and the protection of their rights, and then prevention of sexual and gender-based violence and prevention of war. Resolution 1820 zeroed in on the issue of sexual violence in conflict, in particular the use of rape as a weapon of war. We know that in a number of countries, wars are fought over women's bodies. Women's bodies become the battleground for many wars. And Resolution 1820 strengthened the jurisdiction in the in the special tribunal on Yugoslavia that identified the use of rape as a weapon of war as a form of genocide. So one of the concrete provisions in 1820 is that rape or any form of sexual violence committed during conflict when the warring parties, meaning the rebel groups and the government, agreed to go on a peace negotiation, rape cannot be included in the amnesty provisions. All the perpetrators have to be investigated, and justice must be brought. So that was what 1820 is about, and there were a few more supporting resolutions like 1888, 2106, and 2122 that supported the call to end the use of rape as a war strategy, as part of the war tactic.
And this is a major problem in just about every war zone. Pick a war zone and you've got this problem. It's just pervasive. And of course, the United Nations, the Security Council, plus many of the UN agencies are working in this area to reduce these problems. Who are some of the, you mentioned some of your private partners. Do you network with some of the UN agencies, UN Women,
We
UN
do. We
Population
work closely
Fund,
with them.
different ones like that?
Yeah.
So there are other partners.
Yeah, absolutely. We work very closely with UN Women, especially the Peace and Security section here in New York in their headquarters, and also with the country offices. And the other unique thing that Global Network does, we call them community social dialogues, and we've started this in Rutshuru territory in eastern DRC, where they're like town hall meetings facilitated by local councilors, religious leaders, and our local member organizations, where they convene everyone in the community, and especially rebel groups, armed groups, former and active armed groups. When we first initiated this, some member states were telling us, oh, are you not just legitimizing rebel groups? And we said, no, we're not. Because first, these are not peace negotiations the usual way, meaning, for example, official peace negotiations where the table, literally and figuratively, is two-sided, government and rebels. Those who are fighting each other, those who are waging the war. Whereas in the community social dialogue that we're doing, the table is round, figuratively and literally, meaning all actors that are impacted by the conflict, that are contributing to the conflict and calling an end to the conflict are part of the negotiation. Because in the two-sided table that I was talking about, the premium is on who is waging the war, not on who is waging the peace. And in fact, there's a very, very concrete example from my own country when women's organizations were wanting to be included in the peace negotiation. The first question that was asked to them was, were you carrying guns? Meaning, were you part of the war? And the women said, no, we're not carrying guns. We are in fact anti-gun. We are anti-war. But we are equally invested in this process, in fact more, because it's our families, it's our communities that are directly affected. So in the community social dialogue in DRC, it's amazing. We had My Rebels and M23 Rebels who said, we want to sit down. We are talking here not as rebels, but members of our families and communities. And then the mothers in the group were saying, we are talking to you not as rebels, but we are talking to you as our husbands, brothers, fathers, cousins, neighbors. And we want you to know what you're doing is preventing our daughters and sons from going to school. What you're doing is preventing us from cultivating our farms. What you're doing is preventing us from securing a better future for our children or our children's children. It's been so effective, and they're doing it on their own. They're doing it as a series, and the information that they're gathering, especially around the issue of sexual violence, we are sending to the Office of the Secretary, Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, who is leading the implementation of Resolution 1820.
This is a concrete example of what can be done and why, when it starts affecting people in their families and their lives and their children's lives, that you can get their attention. That is absolutely critical to do that. It is so important. Well, in 2015, I guess it was September 2015,
right,
the members of the UN General Assembly, the 193 countries, adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 logical, laudable goals that can be measured over the next 15 years, the Development Agenda of 2030 Development Agenda. And they're all very important, but one I'm sure that's of great interest to you is number 5, which promotes gender equity and that type of thing. Why is that important, as well as the other 16 goals, not just that? And how does that factor into your work?
Goal number 5 on gender equality is extremely important, because not only that women are half of the population, but women have the unique perspective to offer to ensure that development goals and development programs are effectively implemented. And of course, legally, it's our right as well as provided for in the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which, by the way, is ratified by 189 countries. So at least 189 countries agreed to promote gender equality. So it is a legal right for women to participate in the development and in the work to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's at the core of our work. And as you know, Resolution 1325 and the Women, Peace and Security brings together two very important concepts in the work of the UN: gender equality and peace and security. And of course, part of that gender equality is human rights. But Bill, I also want to add another very important goal in the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and that is goal number 16, on peaceful and inclusive societies. In fact, goal number 16 is the answer, what we consider as an answer to the biggest gap in the Millennium Development Goals, which did not have anything on peace at all, as if sustainable development can be achieved while our communities are being bombed, while our girls are being kidnapped, while how many now? 65 million people have to flee their communities,
refugees,
to be in refugee camps or internally displaced people camps. As if all of those can happen and you can still achieve Sustainable Development Goal. So what I'm saying here is that the equation is Sustainable Development Goals equals long-lasting peace. Long-lasting peace equals Sustainable Development Goals. The two are part of the equation. And we're very happy to see in the new SDGs that we have Goal 16. It's not perfect, of course. Nothing is perfect, but it's a good start in terms of a more integrative and holistic perspective in looking at policies and what needs to happen on the ground.
And this is very important to remember, that the Sustainable Development Goals did pick up many of the areas that were not covered, issues that were not covered under the Millennium Development Goals. And another difference too is that the Sustainable Development Goals are applicable to all countries all around the world, and all countries have signed on to them to a large degree to try to help achieve these very laudable goals. And of course, you're doing a tremendous job in focusing the attention on women. You mentioned the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the various UN Security Council resolutions that focus on trying to improve women's situations in some very dire circumstances. And of course, our viewers can go to www.untitled www.gnwp.org
Yes.
for more information and learn much more about these topics that we're talking about. But Mavic Cabrera-Balleza, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much, Bill, for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.